All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Chapter 5, Homeland Security at the Federal Level. All right, so starting in this unit, we're going to talk about actually how Homeland Security is organized within the United States. So before we start, we talk about kind of what government agencies look like, how government's organized. Um, so agencies and the government's organized into what's known as a bureaucracy. Okay, and bureaucracy is supposed to provide the most efficient and rational structure for addressing problems, ensuring stability, ensuring delivery of services. So governments, in theory, are supposed to be designed rationally and efficiently to solve problems. Um, One of the issues with bureaucracies are that they're not very flexible and don't adapt to change easily. Um, so when you're looking at bureaucracy, you're looking at like a regular organizational chart, and you have all the different boxes, right? Each of those boxes has a special task. So one of the things bureaucracies does is it provides for task specialization. Each part of that agency or government has their own uh, task that they're responsible for. Um, but as you know, if you've ever called a government agency, right, oftentimes it's not very efficient. Like you call one number, they transfer you to somebody else, and you get transferred around, and people are like, well, that's not my job, it's somebody else's job, right? And that occurs throughout the government. An example of like when bureaucracies are not very flexible, think about community policing. Um, so when community policing first started in the 80s and 90s, there was all kinds of federal grant money for everybody to start adopting community policing. Well, no one really knew what that looked like. Like nobody knew what that was supposed to be. But those of you that have taken CRM classes, know that for community policing, a more decentralized structure is better, where a lot of decision making is put out to the field level officers or the precincts, or it's not necessarily decision making needs to be done uh, centralized, right? Community policing works better if people can adapt to what they need to do. Well, that's a very big change for your bureaucratic organization because you're essentially changing the entire structure of how the agency is made. So what a lot of agencies did was they created a Homeland Security, I'm sorry, not Homeland Security. They created a community policing section of their agency. So they added another box to the organizational structure. So instead of adapting and changing like they needed to, they simply just added to the bureaucracy and said, okay, well, those people are going to do community policing. Okay, and that happens throughout bureaucracy. Well, as you know about Homeland Security, as we've talked about already, you know, to do Homeland Security effectively, agencies need to be flexible, they need to be efficient, they need to be collaborative. Okay, and those are not things that are always a strength of bureaucracies. So, something I would like you to think about as we go through this unit and the next couple of units is this the best way for Homeland Security to be organized in the United States? Is this huge bureaucratic monster that we've created, the Department of Homeland Security, is that the best way to do this? Or is there a different way that can be done? Okay, so just think about that. Maybe this is the best way. Maybe there is no other better way. But I'd like you to just think about that as we kind of go along. All right, so let's talk about the federal bureaucracy prior to 9/11. So prior to 9/11, you had these administratively separate federal law enforcement and service agencies that all had their particular duties that they were supposed to be doing, and everything was unsynchronized. Nobody was working together. Nobody was talking. Everybody had their own particular thing that they were doing within the huge federal bureaucracy. Okay, so you have law enforcement agencies and you have service agencies. Law enforcement agencies are um, the large cabinet agencies that I can't talk, charged with enforcing federal criminal law, stuff like the FBI, Drug Enforcement Agency, alcohol, tobacco, firearms, and explosives, those types of agencies. Prior to 9/11, they investigated terrorist threats as they would crimes. Okay, they'd work cases and make arrests. You also have federal service agencies. These regulate and manage services for the general population. Things like regulatory agencies, some are large cabinet agencies, some are independent agencies. Things like Health and Human Services, Department of Energy, Department of Defense, those are all federal service agencies. So prior to 9/11, all had a variety of missions, stuff like regulating immigration, inspecting nuclear facilities, responding to emergencies, but all of them were, again, separate and not working together. So then 9/11 happens. Okay? So one of the things that come out of the 9/11 report was that if we're going to have this efficient Homeland Security enterprise, there needs to be some consolidation of the domestic security community, right? You can't have all these people just doing their own thing. This needs to be consolidated somehow. So, two ways that we should do that is to transform the intelligence community and create this new Homeland Security institutional culture. So, just a quick hitter about the intelligence community because next module is all about the intelligence community. But just as an example of kind of things that happened. Prior to 9/11, the FBI and CIA both had intelligence concerning the hijackers. The FBI knew that foreign nationals were overstaying their visas and were taking flight lessons. The CIA had compiled evidence against some of the hijackers, but neither agency knew that. All they didn't know what the other agency was doing. They weren't talking. They weren't linking intelligence. They weren't communicating. Um, so both of them had pieces. But if they had talked and put it together, maybe things would have been different. Maybe not, but it's possible that they would have. So there were problems in the Homeland Security community because you had the interagency rivalries. Like everybody wanted to be the one to make the arrest, or everybody wanted to be the one to break up the plot. You had these entrenched and real cumbersome bureaucratic cultures and procedures. If you know anything about government, red tape, right? It's all over the place. So they had all these procedures and they had all these bureaucratic cultures um, that did not provide for working together. They talked about that they should, but nobody did. Um, Counter-terrorist operations were fragmented. Nobody was working together. There was very poor coordination of counter-terrorist intelligence collection analysis. There was disconnect between the field offices of these agencies in Washington, D.C. Field offices might be doing something D.C. didn't know about it. D.C. might be doing something field offices didn't know about it. There was very little connection there. You had these turf conflicts everywhere. One of the things that did come out of that was they created the National Counterterrorism Center. And one of the purposes of that was to integrate the counterterrorism efforts in the intelligence community, kind of bring everybody together. But we'll talk about more of that next time. All right, so this new Homeland Security culture. What is it? What does it look like? In July 2002, the National Strategy for Homeland Security came out, and that's the first thing that clarified this new Homeland Security culture. Okay, it explained what Homeland Security was. It identified the essential Homeland Security missions, established priorities for coordinating the protection of these domestic infrastructures. Okay, so it first started kind of laying out like, what is this? What is this new Homeland Security strategy that we're doing? And at the time, it was called the Office of Homeland Security. Well, then in November, it was replaced by the Department of Homeland Security, with the passage of the Department of Homeland Security Act of 2002. And it was tasked with 5 main responsibilities: guarding against terrorism, securing our borders, enforcing our immigration laws, improving our readiness for, response to, and recovery from disasters, and maturing and unifying the department. Now, since that time, there's been other national strategies, other national goals. This culture and this enterprise keeps getting more clarification and more refinement, as we've gone through the years. So since this initial 2002 was first national strategy and then creation of the Department of Homeland Security, there's been a lot more refinement since then. All right, so Department of Homeland Security. So essentially what happened is they took a lot of these separate agencies and put them all under one department. And they created the third largest agency in the federal government that has more than 200,000 employees. Okay, it's headed by a secretary who has cabinet level authority. So the major components of Homeland Security all came out of this 9/11 report, all came out of, what should we be doing after 9/11? So everything got consolidated. Its mission is to ensure the homeland is safe, secure, and resilient against terrorism and other hazards. So they took all this bureaucracy and kind of put it all together in this one bigger bureaucracy. All right, so Office of the Secretary. So the Secretary is in charge of the Department of Homeland Security. It's cabinet level official. The first was Tom Ridge. Okay, so they oversee all the things the Department of Homeland Security does. Now, within the Office of Secretary, there's mission-focused offices that do different things. Things like the Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, Office of Strategy, Policy, and Plans, uh, Office of Legislative Affairs. There's a whole bunch of them. So kind of go through those and see what each of them does. Be able to recognize um, which offices are involved. But I'm not going to go through all of them today because it would take forever. All right, so DHS also has administrative centers. Um, so these are directorates and offices that oversee administrative duties of the mission-specific bureaus. Some of the administrative centers are formerly independent agencies. Things like the Science and Technology Directorate, Countering Weapons of Mass Destruction Office, the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, Transportation Security Administration, Customs and Border Patrol, Citizenship and Immigration, Immigration and Customs, Coast Guard, FEMA, Secret Service. Um, all these are included in Department of Homeland Security. All right, so in addition to the Department of Homeland Security, there's still these other federal agencies that are just kind of out there continuing to do what they do, but some of them also have Department of Homeland Security responsibilities. And they call these sector-specific agencies because their mission involves one of the critical infrastructure sectors that was identified by Homeland Security. So, like Department of Agriculture, Department of Defense, Department of Energy, Health and Human Services, Department of the Interior, Department of Treasury, EPA. All of those are involved with some aspect of Homeland Security, but are not actually part of Homeland Security. So know those and know what they do as well. Okay, so now we get into the military. Right? We haven't talked about the military yet. All we've been talking about is, domestically what Homeland Security looks like. Okay, so the U.S. is kind of different from a lot of places where domestically our military doesn't play a huge role in the day-to-day operations of Homeland Security and defense. Okay, they certainly have a role in that, but is often more international than it is domestic. Not saying they don't have anything to do domestically, because they do. But we have this separation between law enforcement and the military that a lot of countries do not have. So domestic security initiatives often require national defense and homeland security, to kind of meld or join up. So that brings in the Department of Defense, which is a sector-specific agency. Okay, so they have both a homeland security mission and a homeland defense mission, and the two are separate, and they do separate them. So homeland security they view as a concerted national effort to prevent terrorism within the United States, reduce vulnerability, minimize damage, and assist with recovery. And if we talk about Homeland Defense, they view Homeland Defense as the military protection of U.S. territory, the domestic population, and critical defense infrastructure against external threats and aggression. All right, so since 9/11, the military has had a pretty big role in the homeland defense of America with the war on terrorism. Okay, so the war on terrorism was a very different war than what had been fought previously. Previously, the United States had fought wars against other countries. Okay? Vietnam, Korea, World War II, World War I, right? Those are all against particular countries. Well, the war on terrorism is different because you're not actually fighting against countries. The fight is against ideas and behavior. Okay, so even though we were fighting in Afghanistan and we were fighting in Iraq, we weren't actually at war with Afghanistan or at war with Iraq. We were fighting against the terrorists that were in those countries and the terrorist behavior. The war on terrorism was also different because it was fought both domestically and internationally. Domestically, it was fought by law enforcement officers, who would dismantle domestic terror cells, using undercover operations or whatever methods they were using. Internationally, these cells were addressed by special covert troops or special operations military personnel. So when the military assets were deployed, we're talking about large-scale military deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq. Okay, it was, very warlike over there. But how do you define a victory in a war against extremist behavior, against terrorism, against ideas. Um, a prime example was, victory was declared in Iraq, but then after that insurgency took place, which caused more casualties among Iraqi and coalition troops. ISIS sprung up, from all of this. So, how should victory be measured? Can you achieve victory against ideas? What is an acceptable level? Like, how do you know when you won? Right? Those are really good questions to ask, and nobody really has good answers to that. What do you think? Like, think about it yourself. Okay, think about some deeply held belief that you have. Okay, if somebody says you need to change that belief, well, no, I'm not changing that belief. Okay, well, I'm gonna use coercive measures. Say, like, I'm gonna, this person can say, well, I'm gonna punch you in the face until you change your beliefs. Well, that person might change their beliefs to get them to stop hitting them in the face, right? But did they actually change their beliefs? Probably not, right? They just said they did to get whatever was happening to them to stop. Okay, so coercive measures, and we'll talk about this more kind of down the road, but a lot of times coercive measures do not last long term and they're not effective long term. So, how does victory get measured? How do you know when you won when you're fighting against ideas and behavior? All right, with that, I'm going to stop for this week. Um, please think about those two things. Think about, is this the best way to organize Homeland Security? And how do you decide if you've won or not when you're fighting against ideas and behavior? If you have any questions, please let me know, and I'll see you in the next module.